I want to first thank you for taking the time to be here with us and to chat with us about some of the challenges that you might face and that others might face. And one of the challenges that you brought up, Dr. Prestwich, is that you get concerned about you have a concern about how can I communicate to other people that is well received, works out well, gets to the positive outcome I'm after, versus having a conversation that maybe makes it even worse. Do you have an example of a scenario like that we can kind of brainstorm or talk through that might have happened in the past?
Well, I guess, there have been situations where I'm sneaky. I go and I sneak around the office. Sometimes people just jokingly call me the white ninja because I walk so quietly that people don't even know I'm there, right? So, and I don't do it on purpose. It's just, I guess, my natural cadence. So I'm walking around and on slippered feet, I suppose, and I overhear my staff talking to people sometimes, and I hear them explaining something, and sometimes I feel like the tone can be a little, condescending. Like, how could you not know this?
So their tone with the patients can be condescending is what you're saying.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. Keep going.
And sometimes, I wonder if I'm doing that myself.
Sure.
Because it's just one of those moments of self-awareness.
Totally.
Like, if somebody else is doing that, I could easily be doing that too, but how could I have more awareness as to how I am speaking to other people?
So first thought I want to bring to light that I think is brilliant, and I don't think enough doctors do this. I think being the white ninja, if I can use that, of walking around the office and hearing what's being said in your office is such a powerful lesson. Because too often we get busy in dentistry and we're face down, we're working in the patient's mouth, and we don't have the awareness of what's being said, what's going on, and what's really transpiring in our office. And the challenge with that is it's your name, right? Mm-hmm. They won't necessarily remember Susie. They'll remember you and your name because it's your practice. So I personally would recommend that every single person take the time every now and then to do just that. I think it's a brilliant strategy to stand around, if you ever have a hole in the schedule, stand around and listen to what's being said. And an extension of that would be, if you really want to fry your team's mind, I would walk up front whenever you have a hole in the schedule and go, hey guys, what can I help you with? And watch their brains just explode like, is he going to yell at us? And it illustrates the lesson of, do unto others as you would like to have done to you, because usually they don't expect the doctor to come in and offer just to help. Hey, do you want me to call some patients? Do you want me to do something? I mean, if you do that twice a year, 3 times a year, you will cook their gourds. And you don't need to do it every day. By any stretch of the imagination, you have more valuable things. But I think that illustration is powerful. And I think it goes back to the bigger point of how are we perceived? Because we started this off with how are we perceived through communication and conversation, but how are we perceived through action is just as important. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So, but then relative to your question, when you heard someone talking condescending, have you reflecting back and thinking to a time where you might have come across that way?
I mean, I would assume so, because a lot of times you get a little lost. You're so used to dealing with dentistry and having it being the most important part of your life so often that it's like, well, how could you not understand the importance of flossing?
Sure.
How could you not understand the consequences of not brushing your teeth? Things that seem rudimentary, but some people just
don't know.
They haven't had the programming of, I need to brush my teeth before I go to bed. And so, yeah, I would assume that sometimes I have been condescending. How come you didn't brush your teeth? Didn't you know that your gums would bleed like this if you didn't brush your teeth every day or floss?
So one way that you could probably disarm some of that is to start scenarios off, whether it's that one or with a team member, of, hey, I'm curious, help me understand this, whatever this is. So a patient who's like, I don't see why flossing or brushing is important. Hey, help me understand that. I mean, and why I say that is, do you think that by not doing that, that impacts your breath. Could you have bad breath? And I don't know. This is a question to ask your sweetheart, whoever that might be. But does it impact your odoriferous breath, if you will, or how you smell? And similarly, when you floss or brush, you make it sound like it's normal to bleed. And let me ask you something. If I come up and I go like that on your hand, or I touch your hand with a piece of floss, does your hand bleed?
No.
And your mouth is no different. It shouldn't bleed either, which is probably mind-blowing to these people, because your gums are made of skin tissue just like your skin is. They don't see this similarity there. And so if you can create that metaphor, that similarity of your gums are really no different. They're just like a cuticle, right? Underneath your cuticle is hard tissue, being your fingernail, where it grows from. Underneath your gums is hard tissue called teeth, not necessarily growing per se, but hard tissue that's under there. So it's not intended, it's not supposed to do any of that. And what I would say relative to that is if you can come up with story and metaphor to illustrate rather than potentially judgment, I think you'll find the conversations to be more effective. So start with curiosity to figure out where they're coming from, to understand why they're ignorant or they don't believe what you're saying. And then I think follow that with a story to illustrate and a metaphor that brings it back together. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Have you tried a technique like that in the past?
I have.
Did it work?
Yeah. It works well when you try to see things from their perspective, and then using something that you know about them in order to relate to them. Like if they like boating, you use a boating analogy or whatever the case may be. A lot of times it's easy for me as a guy to relate to other men who work on cars, and so I'm not necessarily a mechanic, but I can use metaphors.
Yep.
Using my car.
And the irony of that is there's probably half the audience that could hear this conversation go, duh, you're telling us something we know. But I promise you there's the other half of the audience that's like, wow, I never thought of it doing it that way. So the challenge is to understand how all of this plays a role so we can use it. And for those who are just listening, don't judge what you're hearing, because I promise you there's half the crowd out there that's like, well, I never thought of doing it that way. Or it's a nuanced difference. And, the illustration I like to use there is equilibrations. Do you do occlusal equilibrations in your office? So, and when you do an occlusal equilibration, how much tooth structure do you remove?
A tiny amount.
10, 20, 30 microns maybe? But what's interesting about that metaphor is if you adjust over here on the bottom right, where will I likely hit next?
Yep.
Probably the upper left, right? And then when you adjust that, where will I likely hit? Probably the upper right.
Right.
You know this pattern of how it works because you understand how occlusion works. And the reason why I like this metaphor when it comes to human behavior is we don't always understand, or some doctors don't always understand the human behavior element of this. And as I think you said earlier, the dentistry is the easy part, right? If you were working on a typodont or a mannequin all day long, piece of cake. But attached to that tooth is a person.
Right.
And a person who has feelings and emotions and all kinds of stuff. And before you even get to touch the tooth, if you can't relate to them, if you can't explain and educate to them, how effective can it be?
Not effective at all. Why would they even consent to sitting in your chair?
Yeah, I agree. And, consent to sitting in your chair is an interesting statement you make, because, I've been in emergency medicine for a long time. And the first thing I'm taught to do when I come upon a scene with you is to go, hey, can I help you? Can I do anything with you?
Right.
Can I get consent to proceed? Because if I can't even get consent, we're going to have a real short conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's an important thing to check in with along the way with a person around conversation and around education, to see if we're still on the same page. And I like the check-in process. I like that terminology because it reaffirms that consent. Yes, I was with you. Yes, I'm still with you, and I'm still consenting. And I don't think we need to make it formal, like, hey, do you still consent?
Yeah.
Because I think it will be weird.
Yeah.
But I think and you've probably heard me do that a lot, because you're familiar with what we do a bit. I mean, how often do you hear me say on a lecture day, Do you have any questions? Do you understand? Can I clarify? I mean,
Many
all day
times.
long.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's a process of continuously framing the person. Because I'm framing the person to where they're continuously saying, yes, I get it. Yes, I'm on the same page. Yes, we're moving forward versus no, I'm stalled and stuck and going the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like that process to use it to continuously get consent, even out of a big audience. Does that make sense?
Well, and I also noticed that when you ask the question, you do give a long pause, whether it's awkward or not, but you give them an opportunity to respond.
The air.
Mm-hmm.
The air too. So is there a scenario that you could foresee in the future, whether it's employee or patient, that you'd want to role play out here real quick?
Sure. Let's do a situation where a patient has an insurance question.
Okay.
They don't know anything about dental insurance.
So we'll do a scenario where a patient has a question about insurance. And you're the patient, I'm the doctor or office manager. So what questions could I answer for you about your insurance today?
Well, last time I came into the office, I noticed that I was supposed to have received $400 worth of benefits, but I still got a bill in the mail for $75. Why is that?
So let me see if I'm understanding you. You thought you were going to have $400 worth of coverage, and you still, it must look like on your EOB that you had less than $400 worth of coverage and got a $75 bill.
Right.
Okay. So great question, by the way, and one that we run into pretty commonly. So what is likely the case here, and I'm not looking at your EOB to answer this. If you had it here, I could be far, far more specific, but I'm going to guess, and I'll probably be pretty close. What usually happens in a scenario like this is the insurance company has some fee that they deem to be an appropriate fee for this procedure. They call it usual and customary. Now, their usual and customary could originate from a bunch of different things. One, it could be a statistical analysis. Two, they could have pulled it out of the air. Or three, who really knows? But whatever the case is, in our office, we decide when we do these procedures to use the best materials. And in order to hit what they deem to be appropriate, we might have to use less than good materials, because there are different qualities of materials in dentistry, or less than good enough labs, in our opinion. And as an example, there's been a whole big thing about crowns coming from labs in China and them having lead, and literally causing lead poisoning. Now, the good news is if we were to send our crowns over there, we could get them for perhaps a lot less. The bad news is we don't really feel so good about providing a lead solution in your mouth. It's going to be in your mouth for the next 20 years because of the toxicity associated with it. So I can't say for sure where they come up with their number or how they expect us to come in with a fee that fits that. The other thing I can tell you is we go to a lot of work to do good continuing ed so we can make sure that your dentistry lasts a lot longer. Because we could use cheaper materials and then we'd be redoing it again in 2, 3, 4, 5 years maybe, I don't know, versus us using great materials and you may be getting 10 or 20 or 30 years out of it. So I guess the question I should ask you, and maybe we should have asked you ahead of time, and I apologize for not, do you want us to do this in a fashion that it lasts you the longest and costs you the least in the long haul, or would you rather we just do like the cheapest thing right now?
I suppose the first option.
So I apologize. Next time what we'll do is I'm going to put a note in your chart that we make sure to have a conversation about this so you're prepared and understand there could be a difference. And even after this conversation, you might be. But we'll make sure and be very forthright in that conversation for you so there's never a surprise ever again. And at least you'll have an idea that, hey, there might be some extra fee on top because of this kind of a scenario. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, okay.
Can you see how through explanation, providing value, asking questions, we can disarm the scenario?
Mm-hmm.
And I assume I didn't say anything that was like not factual, did I?
No, you were fine.
Cool. So, that's what I would suggest is first off, always restate what it is they're saying to make sure we're answering the right questions. I find a lot of people, they get stuck answering the wrong question. And then after that, what happens a lot of times is first off, we usually miss that. Secondly, then, what I would do is, what value can we provide to what we do that justifies it? Because what some doctors do in this scenario is they go, hey, what if we just write that off? And do you know what that's called?
Insurance fraud?
Totally is. Yep, right answer. Well answered. And a lot of docs don't realize that. You have to give, if you're going to give a discount to the patient, you have to give it before you submit to insurance. So if I were to write off that $75 because I didn't provide that discount prior to submitting to insurance, I would be committing insurance fraud in a completely black and white world.
Fraud's not good.
No. Now I realize that behavior I just described could be super common and happen a lot. And whether it's being done or not is not my place to judge. It's my job to say it's not legally black and white right.
Right.
So I wouldn't suggest it. And quite frankly, I don't think you should be taking the write-off of the extra fee anyway, assuming this is an out-of-network scenario, and because you're probably worth it. Fair?
Fair.
Any other questions or thoughts you want to talk about during our last few minutes?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you.
You know, I appreciate you taking the time to come on here, have a conversation. I hope that others find value in this conversation, and hopefully it makes you rich and famous, and you get to have a lot of fun and, you know, go on the dental speaking circuit as a result of this short little video.
Wow. My career is made.
It's completely different. It's going to blossom now. And, you know, I'd love to maybe at a different time, or if a different topic comes up, do another one with you, because I find these to be really enjoyable, and I like hearing other people's voices other than just mine. So thank you so much for your time and attention and being willing to share with everybody else out there.
My pleasure. Thank you.